think I'm forever gonna keep the sticker wall though. I like
I
the
like it.
backdrop, and I'm gonna
I
keep
like
that.
it.
I gotta get my son back up here to see how high he can get now, what he can stack.
Is that where he jumps up and slaps it on there? Is that the idea?
Well, he's 2. He was doing this 2, so he's not
Alright.
necessarily jumping up that. It was more stacking things he shouldn't be stacking and seeing how
Uh-huh.
high he can get before it collapses. And I mean, he got pretty high for a
Hey, it's
2-year-old.
up there.
Now he's like obsessed with Sandlot, so we've been playing baseball like every single day. That's actually a little bit more fun for me.
Yeah.
And when we first
You
started,
get
it was
out
like,
there and
yeah,
underhand
you're a
toss, or you
2-year
doing
old.
full-blown heaters?
I'm not throwing. Well, I have a torn labrum, and I'm trying to still put off surgery from high school,
Of course.
so I can't throw a full
Hey,
blown
one of
heater.
these days.
I what I know. Once he needs me to throw a little bit harder, I'm throwing it overhand. He's catching it overhand. He throws it back. It's working. So it wasn't like that. Um,
I can see you being one of
he
those dads. No mercy. You gotta learn to catch it.
I am. I
Yeah.
definitely
Hey,
have high expectation.
that's good. Have you seen, The Instigators yet on Apple
No,
TV?
no.
It, takes place in your hood over there. It's, Casey Affleck and, Matt Damon. Uh, it's actually pretty entertaining. It's not like a great movie by any means, but dude, Casey Affleck crushes that role. Absolutely crushes it. He's
What is that one
hilarious.
on? I saw like the
Apple.
no, it's not on Apple. Well,
On Apple.
what is streaming on Apple? Where I get a subscription to is Apple, but what is the movie plot actually on? The movie plot's not
Oh,
on Apple.
what's the fucking plot? The plot is about trying to rob the corrupt mayor of Boston, and
Okay.
by using shitty heist guys that they just find. And Casey Affleck and Matt Damon are shitty heist guys that they just find. Uh, Super good though. It's like, okay, it's not super good. It's
It's not
entertaining.
getting good reviews.
It's entertaining, bro. Like I was laughing my ass off at Casey Affleck's just like comments all the time. Like he's just constantly commenting. Shut up, Alan. You're not a part of this.
I'm a homer. I'll give it a chance because it's from this area.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll see a ton of landmarks in there. You
Oh,
know, and you
that
got you,
was cool. Like, let's just kick it off with a tangent to start. Then we'll get into Brazil and what's actually happening within the
you know,
House of
we
Fraud
have we
community.
have a script, everybody. No, we're gonna I'm gonna keep this in. We have a script,
We
everybody. I promise.
we have an agenda. I wouldn't
Uh,
necessarily say script, but we have an agenda of things we like to cover because it's what people are talking about in the space. So we like to not gatekeep and be a voice for the fraud community and let you peer into the House of Fraud.
so let's talk
But
about the house
when
fraud.
no, I'm going back to this
Oh,
one
you're
into
still
the movie
going?
first. When they filmed the Whitey Bulger movie, a
Okay,
lot
yeah.
of it was I think the Johnny Depp one.
Yep.
The um, a lot of that was on our street. We lived in Southie at the
Oh,
time.
you lived in Southie, yeah?
I lived in Southie for a little bit post gentrification,
Okay.
so wasn't necessarily what you think of traditionally of Southie. We were part of the gentrification rush, and not what it is today. What it is today is like it's not even what it was for
It's like
us.
tech kids again now, right? Like it's like expensive.
Oh, it's super expensive. It's one of the more expensive places. I
Do you
mean,
remember there was
Boston doesn't.
an MTV attempted to do a show called Growing Up Southie? This is like back in like 2011,
I
12. We got when I was working at Fandango, they sent us the promo DVDs of it. I mean, it was just all the accent, you know, just nothing but like women wearing tank tops in December, smoking cigarettes with like the curly hair and like you know, just Southie
there's
people
definitely
being Southie.
still some of that, and there was still some of that when we lived there. I don't know how much more of that is left, but let's transition south to Brazil. I think it's
Yeah,
about the budget season for a lot of people, whether they're starting it or
it
kicking it
is for
off,
me.
because there's lots of questions around vendors, and not necessarily like, does anyone know this vendor specifically, but more so around, this is the problem that's been bothering me. These are some of the areas that I'm thinking in. Does anyone have recommendations? So I think it's like when you think about the buyer's journey, we're very early into a lot of people of just getting assessments of who do I want to talk to and get like my
Yeah,
range of potential price points to solve this problem next year. Realistically, that's what happens for most companies is you have a problem, you fight it on out the best you can, doing with what you have on the day to day. And ideally, you're building a strong enough business case. So when it comes budget season, one, it's not a surprise to the people you're asking budget. Like when it becomes a surprise during budget season, your back's against the wall. It makes it even harder to get buy-in support. But I know, assuming the story, the communication, transparency has been building along this year so far, that now's the opportunity to pull together and finalize that business case to say, hey, here are, whether it's an RFP or unofficial RFP, you probably are looking at a couple different players in the space. So I do know that one specific topic that came up, and I know we were talking about this before we recorded. Brazil is something that frustrates you, and Brazil is one of those countries I haven't,
Mhm.
from an operator side, because obviously I moved from the vendor side. The vendor side today, that there is one area, but it's a small scope of my life. I know Brazil for me was just one of those areas, like when the company that I work for, when Brazil was one of, like, when you think about the 80/20, US was our huge market for chargebacks because that was our biggest traffic, but our chargeback rate was very safe and very healthy. Um, LATAM and South America was like our next regions we were pretty big in, but specifically we were localizing in Mexico and Brazil. So uh, S- Spanish and then Portuguese.
Yeah.
So we were kind of putting a lot of effort into that. But the norms, again, keep in mind when this specific scenario that keeps me up and is just ingrained in my brain forever for my career is about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more, plus or minus. But Brazil was the one where our chargeback rate was so volatile,
Okay.
and it just, a lot of it was the process of pushing a lot of marketing campaigns before we were fully localized
Yeah,
and
okay.
really understand the payment norms and just the true crime down there. So it was a lot easier for people within Brazil to go to their banks instead of this non-Brazilian company that didn't necessarily speak Portuguese or have a Portuguese CS team built up to help them through. Our FAQs weren't fully built out. So what did that lead to? Lots and lots of chargebacks. So this was also, it was pre-pandemic, but there's lots of volatility in conversion rates. So the pricing was also not necessarily fully localized. We were running tests. So depending on the test pockets, we would see more chargebacks, understandably, less higher conversion rates issues. And that had huge impacts to it. So even just like understanding, that was like my first glimpse into it, of all these different scenarios that impacted a region that wasn't US domestic, and how you'd be healthy for about a month or two and there would be a huge swing and you'd be digging out of a backlog and understanding, trying to understand what happened in Brazil. And our traffic was big enough that it needed the effort to put in because our overall chargeback rates were mainly Visa and MasterCard for the most part of everything there. So they would have a pretty big impact despite US being so healthy, that a Brazilian spike would kick our chargeback rates not over the threshold, but where we start to need to really have controls, different controls and different levers ready to pull and communicating internally. So um, every time I hear about Brazilian chargebacks, whether it's in the community or LinkedIn DMs, I kind of like go right back to there of like, ugh,
It's gotten better. Let me tell
yeah,
you a little bit because we're in Brazil. We were more in Brazil last year than we are now, but we're still in Brazil. So historically, taking payments in Brazil has been challenging. So uh, until recently, the vast majority of people in Brazil use what's called a boleto to make a payment,
yeah,
and it's kind of like I guess it's like think of it like a MoneyGram type of situation where you get an amount and then you get a QR code and then you go to like your bodega and you pay cash money and to fulfill this payment. Like there's digital ways of doing it, but that's essentially what it was. But that particular payment was tied to your identity as a Brazilian system, like, citizen. Like you have a number that you input into this checkout flow as you go. That's your like basically think of it as like a social security number, and that's how you'd make the payment. Now they have a product called Pix that I think people are a little more familiar with, especially people in that modernize in our area. Um, or that modernize in our field payments. It's more like a Zelle type payment. So it's still a QR code based, but it is a basically a direct transfer. So it functions more like real time payments, faster payments, RTP, where it's a direct deposit to direct deposit. So you scan that QR code on your mobile device, you input your same ID, you should have the same ID, your purchase details, and then it sends an instant payment to us. Now the great thing for me as a merchant is I don't have fraud liability on Pix payments. Still did a little bit on Boleto, but it's kind of a weird area. But one of the challenging things with taking payments, including Pix payments, including Boletos in Brazil, is you have to have a localized payment processor. So, or a local business presence. So, because
Yep.
I'm not a business that's
I
based in
remember
Brazil,
I remember all those
I would
combos.
have to cross border the payments. And when you cross border payments, you get really low authorization rates because they think it's fraud. You know, the banks, it's
Yep.
from either end, from the purchaser and from the settlement bank, it looks like it's probably going to be problematic because it's Brazil at the end of the day. So, in order to get around that, most merchants that function in Brazil do what's called merchant of record processing. So, we hire a company that's local in Brazil to take
Yep.
payments on our behalf and settle them into their own Brazilian bank account. And then they send us the funds less the fees. So they are basically establishing a presence in Brazil on our behalf. And then that's how we take the payments. And that is, to this day, how my company currently takes payments. We do merchant of record processing. Now, we have explored having a presence there because they are a big enough market for us that we are interested in. Is it worth opening a iHerb business locally there? Currently, right now, the juice is not worth the squeeze. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. You know, it's still an emerging market, but the geopolitical status of that country can change drastically overnight. And we saw that when Bolsonaro was no longer the president there. When the new guy came in, he changed how the duties and taxes on goods imported from the United States. And historically, that was kind of a 50-50 if they were going to enforce duty and tax at the port or not. So we had a lot of products that were in flight, so to speak, that then when they arrived, had a require the individual to come pick them up at the customs agency and pay this VAT on them that they didn't want to pay anymore. So then that led to chargebacks for us because we didn't disclose that because we didn't know at that. So now it's also the balance of finding a shipper that makes sure that they charge that and displays that to the end customer. Because if you're looking at three shipping options at checkout, you know, one's gonna get there fast, one's gonna get there a couple of days, one's gonna be there tomorrow, you know, like you're gonna look at the price and one of them's going to be cheap and one of them's going to be a lot more. Now that
Yep.
may be because that shipper has chose to collect the D&T up front or at port. And we try to put a sign on there that says, hey, there could be additional fees due product arrival, but not all because we can't always control what the shipper is going to charge and when they're going to charge it. Like it's not always our thing to do. So that's been a challenge is trying to find a partner that makes sure that they include that so we don't have products stuck in port if there are people that are rejecting it and then issuing chargebacks. So a lot of math goes into that. We do that for every region that's a major. We decide if we want to have a localized presence or not. But
Yep.
Brazil specifically is one that is a little more challenging just because the South American payments market overall is is interesting. It's challenging, you know. Like they're still figuring out how to work all these credit card things while also having built out their own infrastructure for the last 20 years themselves and their own cultural norms. And then it's just not all Western payments down there. It's just not.
And when, like, we would see when we talk about just Latin America and South America, when value of currency would swing,
Mhm.
that would also play a huge impact.
We get a
AKA,
ton of
like,
chargebacks when currency drops. We get a ton.
yep,
People are
yep.
freaking out and trying to get their money back. Um, you know,
Or it's like,
what's
hey, this used to cost this, and why does it cost 10 times now? I can't pay for this. I didn't know I was being charged 10 times now. And
yeah.
that was always a huge signal. Where I started to kinda track our bigger regions, like currency, that was one of the things our team when we talk about, like, metrics and signals, that was one of our things we would look for because we knew if currency was dropping quick, we're probably gonna see chargebacks from this region, so I either need to communicate it out and just so people know, "Hey, this country's currency is dropping relative to the USD, we're probably going to see chargebacks here coming, and almost always it did. depending on how long it dropped, that would be kind of depend on like bill through
Yeah.
cycle. Because I was working at a recurring subscription company for this, so we had recurring payments coming through.
So I will say, there are if anybody's listening to this and they're trying to figure out globalizing their payment stack, there are companies, there are payment processors, major ones that do currency lock for 72 hours. So if you get if you authorize a payment at X dollars on X currency, they will lock you that exchange rate, that FX rate for 72 hours until you settle. And that can go miles in making sure that like you are being made whole for your price of goods, so that like if the Japanese yen collapses overnight, you're not going to all of a sudden like the good that you're shipping, you're only getting half the money for all of a sudden. They lock you at that exchange rate for that 72 hours. There may or may not be a premium based on the size of your business for that, but if it's, I mean, it's something that might be interesting to people that are doing a lot of foreign currency. So I would say
Well,
most of our listeners probably are not.
I think it kind of depends because I think a lot are, I mean, I'm just looking at the analytics. A lot are definitely US based, but so majority of the traffic is probably US to US. I'm making assumptions, kind of looking at some of people who interact or have messaged me. They definitely have global presence. I just don't know as an external person what the percentage is. I imagine they do have traffic, but maybe not necessarily enough to pursue something like that specifically, especially if it's going to cost a premium. And but it's never hurts to at least have things on like the nice to have roadmap of if we grow within these areas, what do I need to know or what do I need to kind of plan for or could I present in a time of opportunity? If you don't know these things and you learn you're expanding into a different region and going to put a lot of money behind, if you don't know what to look for, you don't know what to ask for, you don't know what to ask your partners for help on necessarily. Maybe a good partner might suggest things, but they might come off salesy of trying to upsell you in the time of opportunity, whether it is a solution to a problem you don't know that you're gonna have. So that lean on your partners, understand how other people are able to grow into those areas. I know I'd always do that. I worked on smaller teams, so for a big portion of my time, it was just me. So I couldn't do everything myself and as much as really wanted to. I needed to ask people for help internally, externally. So I would sometimes push, especially if we're coming up on a contract, I might work a little
Mm.
bit more closer with that vendor to help me do my job better, make it a lot easier to help renegotiate the ongoing terms. So there's always areas of opportunity. There are a lot of good vendors out there that have those strong support models to really make sure that you do know better ways to utilize their products. Or if you are entering something, they probably have a portfolio of people who have already done it.
I think that's going to be it for this particular episode. We covered some Brazilian payments. There is a couple other posts in there, some really good document verification stuff. If you're curious about what's going on in there, hit that apply button. Brian will vet you, make sure you're quality material, and we'll see you in there.
As always, if you are curious about learning more, though, reach out to someone who is a member. Always happy to take introductions and learn more from there. Um, Big piece to the community is the people we have in it. So if you want to be a part of these conversations, not just hear about them, hit apply. We hope to see you on the other side because no one goes to school for fighting fraud.